This is a podcast from the Office for National Statistics, exploring the differences between rural and urban areas. For a transcript, email info@ons.gov.uk. First, we will look at the rural and urban classification that covers England, but the same classification is also available for Wales. A consistent set of rules are used to define areas. For example, settlements with more than 10,000 residents in 2001 being urban. This gives a clear, consistent, freely available set of data that can be used to match onto other datasets. With this example shown here using a small area geography known as middle layer super output area, which are those with an average of 7,500 residents. If we firstly look at England's urban areas, and now the rural areas, we can break rural up into two separate settlement types, with town and fringe areas shown here in darker shade. We can also break the map up into settlements that are less sparse and sparse. The lighter coloured sparse areas on this map contain mostly rural areas, with a few urban areas, such as Berwick-upon-Tweed. Sparse areas contain less than 2% of the population. In contrast, roughly 4/5 of the population live in urban, less sparse areas, covering roughly 1/5 of the land. Not all topics show a pattern of rural-urban differences. Let's explore several that do. The definition can be used to look at differences in the population structure between urban and rural areas. Using a population pyramid that shows the percentage of people in each 5-year age band, starting off with England's urban areas and now using this line to show the rural areas, we can see there is a bigger rural population peak at ages 60 to 64, and that rural areas have relatively high proportions of people aged 50 and over. The proportion of people in their 20s in rural areas is in stark contrast to the proportions of people in their 40s, which can be up to twice as high. This strongly suggests that people move out of rural areas in early adulthood and back in later on, creating an almost corseted population pyramid. If populations differ, we might also expect to see differences between people who are engaged in the labour market. Looking firstly at those who are unemployed from the Labour Force survey, the unemployment rate for people aged 16 or over in urban areas is 8.6%. The rural rate, at 5.2%, is much lower. People aged 16 to 64 in rural areas are less likely to be economically inactive too. For example, here's a comparison of those who are inactive because they are sick or disabled. The same survey can give us information on qualifications. Here are those with no qualifications, and we see the rural population aged 16 to 64 is less likely to have no qualifications compared to the urban population. For the highest qualifications, that is those with a degree or an equivalent qualification, rural areas are more likely to have people educated at this level. ONS published data on small area incomes, covering different measures for households. The average level of total income for urban households is shown here alongside net income, which takes account of taxes, who lives in each household, and some housing costs. Rural households have higher incomes, in these cases around 7% and 9% higher. Over the course of a year, this corresponds to £2,500 and £2,000 respectively. However, there is another story if we look in more detail at the types of urban and rural areas. The line here represents the national average weekly total household income of £670. And here is how it compares with income in the three less sparse area types. Both types of rural area have above average incomes. However, when we compared each less sparse area to its sparse counterpart, we see that all three sparse area types have below average incomes. In conclusion, rural areas have higher incomes however we measure them, but there are pockets of lower income rural areas in the sparser corners of England, places like Northumbria and North Devon. Both types of urban area have below average incomes. Earnings data allow us to compare the earnings of people by local authority using the rural-urban local authority classification. This graph shows the average income for residents in each local authority minus the average for those working in each local authority. Therefore, a negative value means those working in a local authority earn more than those living there, although there will be some people who live and work in the same area. We can see that the average major urban resident, for example, earns £33 less per week than those working overall in major urban areas. These areas include metropolitan areas and London boroughs, but workers also earn more than residents working in the other two types of urban area. Workers who live in rural areas, on the other hand, earn more than those who work there. Earnings are flowing into all three types of rural area, not just the last rural type, significant rural. If we do indeed think that the standard of living is higher in rural areas, this seems to be at least in part dependent on workers choosing to commute to jobs in urban areas. For more information, email better.info@statistics.gov.uk. More analysis can be found in the Regional Trends article with the link in the description of this podcast. There is also another podcast explaining the rural and urban classifications. Also, a Google map using the definition for areas across the UK is available at the link in the description of this podcast. Other products that can be used alongside rural and urban classifications can be found from the Neighbourhood Statistics website for each country.